everyone. Welcome to All the Forbidden Things. This is the podcast where we talk about the things we're not talking about, often with our loved ones and friends. This episode's going to be a little bit different. We're not going to follow the typical format, which kind of ends up speaking to multiple experiences, or we're kind of exploring or teasing out the difference between people's experiences. The explicit effort of today's episode is to talk about one specific experience and a very pertinent issue that that community is facing, and that is the intersex community. There has been a recent order that there are only two genders recognized in the United States. We want to talk about how that is scientifically incorrect.
Dumb and dumber. Those are the two genders.
Some of the major kind of implications of that how that could play out for people who biologically do not fall under the female or male banner. So so Julie, introduce yourself for us. Again, she's been on an episode in the past, our first episode, but tell us about yourself, and then please tell us explicitly what intersex means.
As I lick my teeth to make sure I don't have anything in them. Hi, everybody. My name is Julie Mayfield. I am an intersex advocate here in the United States. I am intersex. What does that mean exactly? There are so many different definitions, Rebecca, out on the internet, and over the years they've all kind of ebbed and flowed into each other. But the easiest way to kind of explain it in layman's terms is there is a spectrum that lies between male and female, and within that spectrum or bridge in between XX for female and XY for male, there are recognized more than 64 variations of the X chromosome, and any of those variations delineate that you are intersex because you fall in between the sexes. You are somewhere in between, right? And some of the more notable ones would be XXY, which for many years was called Klinefelter syndrome. That's how I was born, but it gets kind of hokey, and we'll talk about that as we move on. Some of the other more XO, which is Turner syndrome, you can be XXX. These are some of the more common ones, and then it gets into trisomy and all of these different levels of different variations. But any of those variations, any of those 64, are deemed by the medical community at large kind of under this umbrella of being intersex. AIS, which is androgen insensitivity. You can have that and be considered intersex. And some people out there would even say anything that's not typically cisgendered, structurally XX or XY would be somewhere in between, and that's intersex. But you have to have chromosomal and genetic tissuing that is almost a hybrid that makes you intersex. Some of the more kind of just direct definitions that you'll find on the internet will say an individual that does not have sexual characteristics or physical characteristics that fit within the binary. Mm-hmm. So they have kind of anything and everything but. And there's some danger in that too, because even in those definitions, people say, "Oh, you're not normal." Well, what is normal? Mm-hmm. And it gets interesting. There's a talking about the order that came out. One of our fellow advocates, Kimberly Mascott Zeiselman, has worked at the UN on in the department. There was a department a few years ago for the advancement of the intersex community, and she kind of chaired that and was working for the UN. And she recently came out with an article that said 4 days ago, they finally acknowledged in this major research paper that came out by the HHS under the Biden administration that the intersex population absolutely exists. That scientifically and medically, you can't deny that it exists because it does. And this particular research paper has brought more information in the last, I mean, it literally has covered the last few decades, not decades, but the last few years. But it's more research that's ever been done, ever, on the intersex community. And it came out 4 days before Trump went into office. And so she was in this article saying, 4 days ago, you finally admitted that I existed. But now this executive order has come out saying that I don't.
It makes one wonder why, and this isn't, I don't want to go off on a rabbit trail with this, but it does make one wonder, why is it so troublesome for, what is it, 66 with the 64 intersex genders to exist? Why is it so troublesome to acknowledge this scientific fact? Like,
There are a lot of
what
people
is it
that
about the female male binary that is so
well,
important?
it almost makes you feel like we're all human. We're all a part of the same species. Why is there such a troublesome aspect to being human, right? It's kind of in my head, I'm like, okay, love sharks. I love sharks. But even within the shark species, there are hundreds of different types of sharks.
Yeah.
And it's almost like this great white shark has come into the picture and said, oh, well, you can only have great white and hammerheads.
Yeah, that's a perfect, I was going to ask for a metaphor. That's a perfect.
And you're like, but what about makos and spinners and
I mean,
sand shark?
you
Like,
really
and they're
do
like,
have to
oh,
think
they
about,
don't exist.
yeah, you really have to think about the why. Like, why is it so threatening that these facts are there? And I mean, I will personally say, I think it's because then it means you can't have to play by a role, and we do just have to experience each other as human, right? If you can't be marked in one of the two categories, then you exist as a human being that has an autonomous personality and
I
humanity.
think on I think on some weird level, well, okay, let's be honest about a lot of things. A lot of people do not, you talk about the trans community and there's that crossover. And I have to remind people out of the gate, um, for the longest time, they said 2% of the world knows that they're intersex, and that would be roughly about 155 million people are living in this world knowing they are intersex. And only 2% of that number identifies as trans. So
Mm-hmm.
you can be intersex and be cisgendered, non binary, gay, straight, lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
You could identify as a box of chocolate chip cookie mix. But, that number is so minute that identifies as trans, and there's nothing wrong with that. But that's to say that, you're born intersex. You were born that
Mm-hmm.
way. And then you have all these identities that you can identify as, right? But there is this crossover, right? And I've had trans people in the past say to me, I envy you because you get what I want. And I said, what do you mean? And they said, well, you can walk into a doctor's office and get estrogen, but I have to file all this paperwork and go through these directives and go see a therapist for 2 or 3 years, and they question my mental, and I have to stop them and say, oh, okay, not that it's a choice, but you are choosing to go purchase the car that you would like to drive. I'm in this car and I need
Mhm.
those hormones just to turn the engine on.
It's medically necessary.
It's medically essential for my community to have access to those things. I had said at the beginning of this last week, and I have a lot of trans friends, but I had said at the beginning of this, I'm like, okay, worst case scenario, and it would be horrible if over the next 4 years you had to revert and go by what's on your birth certificate. That would be horrible, and I hope you don't have to do that. But you were born male or you were born female. Now, it would be horrible. I understand that, and I'm not challenging that. But what does somebody like myself have to say? Because
What's on your birth
we're
certificate?
both. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, what? How do you? Alicia Weigel Roth is another huge advocate, and she wrote a scathing but also very enlightening piece in Time the week of January 20th, when this directive came out, and I thought, well, that's very pertinent. And she writes about how the intersex community, this one executive order will erase us. You are erasing us completely. And the trans community will say, oh, we're being erased too. Well, you aren't. I mean,
Mhm.
they certainly are getting rid of the word trans and the letter T, and they're taking that out of documentation, and it
Yeah.
feels like you might be getting erased, but you're still very much in it, right? The community is not going to let you slide by. Their community is going to come around you and say, we can't have the LGB without the T, right?
Mhm.
You're still going to find support in that. But the intersex community, we're literally hung out to dry in the pasture.
Mhm.
Like, we get in that same timepiece, Alicia Weigel said, we're the gotcha moment.
Mhm.
We are often used in the intersex community as the gotcha. You can't say that scientifically. What about intersex people? They prove that that's so bogus. They blow that out of the water for you. You can't deny their existence. And then as soon as we're used as the gotcha, then we're forgotten about and we're pushed
Mhm.
aside
Mhm.
again.
Mhm. And there's not, I feel like you haven't even, a lot of the reasons that regular people are not recognizing you is because they don't actually know about you. I knew what intersex was before I met you, but I knew very, very little about it. Um,
And we
and
can go into detail because people are still probably like, I don't get it.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah,
for me
yeah, we can.
personally, I didn't know. I knew in high school that I was born with an extra X. I was raised as a male because doctors told my parents, literally, a doctor told my dad, it's tiny, but it's got one. You have a boy. That was 1975 in Alabama. Even if they had pertinent information for what intersex was in 1975, they weren't going to be handing it out to parents. And my
Mhm.
parents were college educated, and even some of the things that we went through throughout my adolescence, my parents would question, and doctors would say, don't worry about that. That's nothing. Don't worry about that. He'll be fine. And then, but they had legitimate concerns. I mean, at 12, I started to cycle.
Menstrually.
And they told my parents it's adolescent hemorrhoids. And my dad was like, that's not a thing. That's not a thing. And they're like, sure it is. It's rare, but it's a thing. And my parents were like, this is right. It wasn't until I was 43 that we found out that I was born with one ovary and one testy, a partial uterus, a female cervic floor, a male heart or a female heart and male sized lungs. Somebody recently on TikTok said, "You're lying. That's not a thing." And I said, "It's not? Think about it. Like, I shouldn't have to sit people down and say, think about it logically, but men and women have different size organs, right? I
Mm-hmm.
mean, that makes sense. Kristen Chenoweth, who rings in at under 5 feet, she's like 4'6". She's not going to have Shaquille O'Neal's heart inside her body. That would kill her.
Mm-hmm.
Her heart's going to be smaller. They often say you can measure your heart by your fist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I tell people all the time, measure your mom's fist against your dad's fist. Put your fist up against your husband or boyfriend's fist, right? You can look at somebody's frame and look at their but Shaquille O'Neal is going to have a much bigger heart because he needs it to run his much bigger, taller framing body.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when people kind of challenge that, you say you have to think about it logically. That makes sense, right?
So again,
Last year I was
why do we need to challenge why there's more sharks? Like, why are we even challenging? It just is interesting to me that people don't want it to be true.
and why
Anyway,
don't they
just
want it to
thinking.
be true? And then it makes you think, is it a control thing?
I
Is it
mean,
a is it
I think it's
a
a
is
patriarchy
it a
thing.
patriarchal control thing? Is it a
Right. Yeah. But I mean, you could still have a patriarchy if you said of all the genders, males are still the best. But I mean, it's harder to control people when there's more variation among us. I don't know. I mean, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but I do want to pose to people, if you have trouble accepting it, where is that coming from? And if you are witnessing the government having trouble accepting that, the administration lying about it, or refusing to even look to see if it's a thing. I mean, I think that's just as likely. Um, so
I mean,
why?
I love to break things when I educate. I love to break things down into simplicity, right? There was one of my favorite movies growing up was Philadelphia, the Tom Hanks Denzel Washington film, and Denzel played Tom Hanks's lawyer, and he would always go up to people and be like, "Explain it to me like I'm a 4 year old." And I've always kind of carried that because if you think of the human population and all of the genders that exist and all of the things that exist out there, and then you think about a car lot, people go to a car lot. And I'm saying when you go to a car lot and you've got like an auto mart, right? So you've got like a Hyundai and a Toyota and a Subaru and a Ford, and they're all kind of right there together. You go looking for the car that's going to call your name, that you want to drive, that you want to be in, right? And so you have all these options. Imagine going to an AutoZone and they're like, you can have a white Prius or you can have a blue Oldsmobile. Those are your only two options.
Yeah, that is crazy. It also, I mean, another way you could think about it is race. What if they were like, we only recognize that there are black people and white people, and all the
Yeah,
other
but they're
races are
already
not?
there. Do you know what I mean? That this
What?
administration's already saying things like, "We recognize that they're black people, but you can't be married to them if you're white." Like, they're getting to that point. That I just saw somebody out of Idaho, some Republican. She wants to strip same-sex marriage. She's gone to
Yeah, of
the
course they
to
do.
the courthouse and said, "Let's get rid of that while we're at it." And then they said Clarence Thomas said that um, gay marriage and interracial marriages would be on the chopping block this administration. And I'm like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah. And the thing is the building blocks of these things are sweeping generalizations and arguments and breaking things down into overly simplistic categories. And that becomes easy to control and manipulate and change up and start removing from, right?
I mean, we
So,
talk about the intersex community being erased. That research paper I talked about that the HHS did came out with statistical numbers saying that now they believe over 5 million people in the United States have intersex traits. That's crazy. 5 million, right? And before the number was not that many. And they're saying that now 5 million have intersex traits. Now that doesn't mean, I mean, you could be phenotypically male on the outside and
mhm,
have XXX chromosomes. You can be phenotypically female on the outside. And when we say phenotypically, we're saying that you present fully female on the outside, right down to your genitalia, right? But have XY chromosomes.
mhm, mhm. Yeah,
And
which is amusing the chromosomal definition that was given in the order.
well, but it also, when we say it erases us, they're not even teaching. It's said in that same order, you can't even teach intersex exist. You can't teach it. You can't talk about it. You like it literally is erasing the intersex community.
What happens to you physically? What happens to the next intersex child? Are they assigned randomly one of the binaries?
Oftentimes, if there is a question at birth, which the intersex community has fought really hard for in the last 20 years with moderate success to end. But usually, if there's a question at birth, meaning you come out with ambiguous genitalia, which I didn't, right? They just said it was really small. Some people don't. Some people you won't even recognize that you're intersex until you go to have children, or if there's another issue in your adult or young adult life that requires them to test for it. But essentially, or something else arises. But essentially, if you come out with ambiguous genitalia, which can also happen in cisgendered people and other people outside of the intersex spectrum, then doctors will say, pick one or the other, and will remove the offending part, and then you can raise them as whatever gender you want. However, when you think about what's going on the inside of your body, let's say Abby is born. Abby is given this great name. She had ambiguous genitalia, so they're going to raise her as a girl. Um, I actually know women like this, but because her genitalia was ambiguous, as she ages, they may say to her, that doesn't open at the current moment as much as it should. So you're going to have to put something in there and open it and really train it to open as you get older, because we removed the other part, but we're not going to tell her we removed the other part. But she might have collective memory as she gets older, but we're just going to we're going to sweep over that. And then she's having to do these things, right, because you're giving her the impression that she's only viable because of what is down there, and you're trying to make it work for her, right? And then puberty comes along. Her body is going to react at puberty and onset puberty to the things that were put inside her body, whoever you think put them there, right? The universe, God, whatever you believe in. But her brain and her body are going to start to produce and work with what she was given. And that might not be what fits Abby's chosen gender. And I'm not saying that makes her trans or anything else. It's just saying the body's going to. I cycled at 12 because my body internally had more female aspects than it had male aspects.
Mhm.
So I went through a very female puberty, but I had pediatricians telling my family, oh, just give them more testosterone. But that causes more problems as you get older. And a lot of my adult health issues were a result of me being on such an obscene amount of testosterone,
Mhm.
and then switching back. And then, you can't play with life like that.
No. Well, and it's ridiculous because I think some of the same mindset that would decide to determine a child some sort of gender and do surgery and gender confirming care in their chosen choice so that they just made one and it seemed like they could round up in that direction are opposed to anybody else doing that on their own terms for their own choice.
Well,
And
and it gets wonky in there, right? Because the intersex community knows that that will continue for us.
Mhm.
You're not going to give us a say at birth, and
Mhm.
you're going to continue to experiment. I said, God forbid we go all the way back 80 years and they just abort us as soon as we come out. They
Yeah, I was
terminate
just
us,
gonna
right? Or
say,
they terminate us before we're born. I
for
mean,
people for people who
you,
don't know why, like if you haven't come across intersex people, or you don't know that you have, because you have, but if you have not really heard of this before or aren't aware of it, historically there are a lot of reasons, including their kids never got told what they came out with and they were raised a certain way, or it was hidden, um, or it didn't come to light until they were later adults or hasn't yet and they're living with those traits, or what are some of the
I
other
tell
reasons?
everybody there are a couple of things that you can watch that are available to you on Amazon Prime that I'm pretty sure the current administration has no idea exist, right? But on Amazon Prime, there's a movie called Everybody. Everybody. It came out. It was directed by Julie Cohen. It came out from Focus Features. Alicia Weigel Roth is in it. Um, there are some great advocates that are in it, but it gives you a full, concise kind of picture of the intersex community. It's a 90-minute film. I use it when I educate and advocate a lot and show it. But you can find that on Amazon Prime. You can watch a 15-minute movie on YouTube that came out this last year called Common as Red Hair, because they say that statistically, if you know somebody with red hair, you also know somebody that's intersex, um, which statistically is true, right? And then that's a great little film. Has Wally Kurth in it, who used to be on My Children, one of the soaps, General Hospital, and it's a great film. Kimberly Mascot Zeiselman was one of the producers on that. There are intersex characters that have appeared in film and television over the years. There was a great show called uh, Faking It on MTV that had an intersex character in one of the lead roles. The new movie Conclave, supposedly, I haven't seen it yet, but
Yeah,
that has an intersex character in it.
what a
So
powerful film.
we are starting to, I think for our community, it's hard because, especially with platforms like Instagram and TikTok and people becoming influencers over the last couple of years, you've seen a lot more intersex people come out and talk about their story and talk about what they've gone through. And now it is really starting to be recognized. But even with being recognized, I have a really good friend, Nicole Parker, that's trans, and she's an advocate in the Orlando and the Florida area for the trans community. And she said something to me last year and it stuck with me. And she said, Julie, I admire the work that you're doing. She's like, but let's be honest. She goes, the trans community is 20 years behind where they should be with advocacy. And she goes, and that means the intersex community is 30 years behind that. And I thought, that's true. That's very true. That people don't really understand trans and it's starting to make its mark. They really don't understand intersex. And I think people that aren't surrounded by it and it's not in their wheelhouse, I think they're flooded by all this information coming from both sides. And so the intersex community definitely gets kind of pushed out a little bit, um, because the focus then becomes on the trans community and the focus becomes hate towards the trans community and and um, ignorance towards the trans community, and that's roped into still ignorance that lingers from the gay community and the pandemic of AIDS in the 80s, and there's still, this subculture of people that still have no clue that all these other identities and people exist around them, and they kind of have tunnel vision, and they get upset with the pronouns and so then, here comes the intersex community saying we're the I in the acronym because we're a part of that community, but we're also, you need to know about us, right?
Mhm.
Also, and I think that minutia kind of just gets swept under the rug. My mom had said to me a couple of months ago, she goes, "Do you get frustrated because you're doing all this work for the intersex community and people don't see you?" And I'm like,
It is really challenging. It's hard for me to even say anything about it, so I will apologize in advance for any mistakes. I look forward to some guests that I'm going to be having who can speak to the trans experience. But
I really
what
want a
is
facelift.
interesting to me, and I think is challenging, are you looking at your face?
I'm like, I really want a facelift.
What's interesting to me is how the LGBTQIA kind of thing has all grouped together as though it's all one type of thing. And it's really just not cis hetero, right? Anything that's not that is like all in this thing. And that is really beneficial for combining advocacy or fighting for the minority groups within that. What the problem is once that group at large, or in this case, the subsection of trans and intersex people who do not fit the binary, non-binary people might fall under that as well, but are all grouped together, but almost treated as, in a political, conversational, spiritual sense, part of the same group.
Well,
And
and you see a lot on social media. I've seen a lot in the last couple of weeks, and it makes me kind of upset. But I can't do anything, Gina, because then it looks like I'm being the brat in the family, and that I'm not standing up
you don't
for
want to
my
betray your own, if you
siblings.
will. Yeah.
But like, you'll see a lot of memes that say we've got the non-binary and the trans community, and I'm like,
Well, you know
well,
what's
who's got the intersex community?
well, and you know what's an interesting thing, and one of the reasons that I think it's very urgent that we release this show and that we are talking about this is I very much believe in spiritual identity, self identity, our psychologies, our personalities. I can absolutely get on board with the idea that there are male and female types of energies and things like that, right? That we form as part of our spiritual identities. I'm sure there is science that we have not yet uncovered that explains the trans experience in a much more logical way.
Well, I
However,
kind of laugh on the level of
why do we have
every
to?
time we see a movie with aliens in it, they don't have genitalia.
Yeah.
Vampires don't have genitalia. And I'm like, and yet they can touch each other and have a mind blowing sexual connection, right?
Yeah.
And they get out of the swimming pool like in Cocoon and they're like, that's the best sex I ever had. And you're like, but how is that? Like,
Yeah.
sometimes I wish we didn't have such, because there is, especially on this planet, right, in this time, there is definitely oh there's a need to know if somebody has a penis or a vagina,
Yeah.
and what are and I,
There's an
if you break it
obsession
down
with gender.
simply, people get so upset, like guys will get so excited when a girl has a nip slip, and I'm like, you have a nipple, men have nipples, like we all have nipples, they don't look any different. Like a female nipple doesn't really look different than a male nipple. Might be larger, might be smaller. I've seen some hefty dinner plates on men. Like it's a nipple. We all have them. Do you know what I mean? And we all have pecs and breasts. I've seen men at the gym that look like they had bigger breasts than women I know that are in the male, I mean, the adult entertainment world.
Mhm.
Like, we've all got a butt. We all have a butt. Some of us don't. I don't have a butt. But we all have cheeks. We all have nipples. We all have, so why do we have to knock everything down to, do they have a penis or a vagina? And then
Right.
it gets knocked down to, well, how big is her labia and how big does his penis go? And
Mhm.
you're like, that has nothing to do with the person.
Right, right, right. And I think what is challenging here is that we are all a little fixated on our identities in terms of how we present and experience ourselves and what you have, and then therefore what role you might be assigned to play in the world. But the problem right now is that you're facing a very physical reality, and I think that's why it is absolutely essential that the intersex community is being addressed and being looked at, separated out from questions of gender identity, separated out from advocacy groups, literally just, larger advocacy groups, literally just your physical body is at risk if doctors are not allowed to ultimately treat you for the different conditions of varying gender chromosomes and unknowns, and you're at risk if a child is not able to be given a birth certificate unless they are mutilated into one gender or another.
Right.
Like, there are some serious physical realities. We can take this sense of identity tied to this thing away, which I think actually is something that intersex people show. Is like, you can have an identity outside of being a man or a woman. Like, you are a person, right? But you are specifically facing some very serious physical realities. This is not about psychological rights. And it's not about community. It's not about identity. It's about your physical body and what's going to happen to it. And what are you going to be facing? And what are the implications medically for, what is it, 5 million people you're saying in America who are not going to be recognized for what they physically are? What what are some things that maybe you have faced, but especially that you think will change potentially if they go down this road really hard? Like, what are some things in your medical care or the next child that is born intersex that you think could happen
I
from
don't
this?
know. There are people out there that say, "Oh, because you're intersex, they're not going to do that to you." And I'm like, well, y'all all voted for Trump, thinking your egg prices were going to go down, and it's 17, $18 now for 12 eggs. Um, I think he has proved everything that he said he was going to do, or that he was not tied to. You're now starting to see he is tied to it, and he was always tied to it. And for him, it's revenge, and he's, and I, we're all kind of. I was raised Christian, and I draw a lot of inspiration from that, and kind of, try and focus on that. And so I, one of my favorite things that my parents would say all the time is, especially my dad would say, he's not going to bring you to it and then not take you through it. And so I have to remember that, right? I think it is tough for a lot of people right now, looking at the scope of what it could mean medically for them moving forward. Um, I've heard people in the trans community say, I can't go to the hospital this week. I really feel bad, but what if they won't treat me because I'm trans? And I'm like, but they'll still treat you. They might do more damage by not giving you the hormones that you've been on
Yeah, yeah.
in order to be trans, but they will still treat you. They're not going to kick you out on the street, to my knowledge. There are going to be, even if it's one doctor in that hospital, somebody's going to have moral aptitude and stand up and say, I'm treating you. Don't tell anybody I don't want to lose my license, but I'm going to treat you. I don't think you won't be treated. It just might not be in the way that you think you deserve or that you want. And the only thing you can do at that point is stand up for yourself and advocate for yourself, which you should be doing anyway
Mm-hmm.
in the medical community. In your medical journey, you should be doing that for yourself anyway, because nobody else is going to do it for you.
Mm-hmm.
But we are at risk. I mean, I already see, I work in the medical community now, and I can already tell you, even in 2 or 3 weeks' time, I've seen pharmacies um, not cover certain medications and start to say, we don't have access to those and we can't prescribe that to you, or that's not going to be able to be filled for you. Not personally, that hasn't happened to me, but and I have always kind of stockpiled my meds because you never know when you're going to
You
need a
never know.
Xanax or where you're going to be, and it's
Shh.
digging around in your purse like, what, found one? Fuck, that was a Tic Tac. But I mean, I've always stockpiled, um, but I've started to see that, and that's just been in a week's time or 2 weeks' time. And so I think for everybody, not just myself and not just people in the intersex community, I think for everybody, I think it's going to get rough before it gets better. And I think a lot of people are going to be left out in the cold. I hate saying that, but I think a lot of people are going to not have access to certain things. But the flip side is maybe other things will boom. Maybe marijuana will finally get passed in another administration because people are going to be growing it out of a need to get rid of their pain and to try and find, like, maybe people will go a little more holistic at this point. Like, it's not a bad thing to step away from the pharmacies and to get away from all the things that are in some of these drugs that are making people bloated and wonky and all these weird side effects. It wouldn't be a bad thing to get away from that. So if there's a way for you to naturally get the hormones that you need, or if there's a way to derive it from a plant, I think all the time, and this is crazy again, but I think all the time, I think, what did people do on this planet before there were pharmaceutical companies?
Wow, yeah.
You know, you look at the Native American community, and they've always kind of gone through this kind of new thing that we're starting to see with this administration kind of hit some of us directly. But, they've always kind of been on that outer ring, and they've made their own medicine for centuries
Mm-hmm.
and survived, right? And they've had balms and elixirs and things to cure and teas and hallucinogenics, and they've treated their whole community that way with those things. So I mean, maybe it's not maybe it's not a bad thing to step. Maybe this will be a cleansing in a way and get us away from some of those pharmaceutical companies. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is. There is a fear, but I can't let that fear
Mm.
take away from my life, because that's not what God would want. I'm down here for a reason. I have a purpose, and I am supposed to be living the life that was given to me. And that's what I've been doing. So, on some level, I cannot let the fear of not having access to things stop me. I don't think, let's think about the trans community and the non binary community. I don't know. Those people are strong. Those
Mm-hmm.
individuals are really strong. I don't think a lot of them are going to say, well, I can't get my hormones, so I'm going to stop being who I am.
Mm.
I think they will still find a way to express themselves and be out. It might not be the way they felt before the situation happened, but they're not going to, if anything, this is going to make them stronger. If anything, that saying, if it does not, what does not kill us makes us stronger, that is very true. I've been through a lot of things in my life, and a lot of people credit me with being very strong and grounded in that. And there are times when I'm like, if you only knew what I was like behind closed doors, I'm not that strong. But that's not true either. That's kind of me just being, kind of caught up in my own doubts sometimes. But to be honest, I'm a very strong individual, and the world has made me that way. And I'm never going to stop who I'm meant to be because there's a hurdle. So the great thing about hurdles are you can get around them. You can jump over them, you can run around them, or you can go under them, right? But there are ways to get to the other side. It may not be a way that you've ever thought of before. It may not be a way that you want to necessarily go, but it might be a way that you have to look into to be able to continue to live the life that you want to live.
Thank you. That's good advice for all of us, honestly. All right. Well, Julie, thank you so much for your time. I'm sure that if people have any further questions, I'll provide some resources. I can either field them along to you. We'll put
Yeah.
some links to those
And then my book's
films.
coming out.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Julie has a book coming out about her experience, her life, growing up.
We just changed the title, though.
Yes, what is the title now?
Well, the title has gone from Not Just Julie to other titles. And then it was decided after this executive order came out that my photo shoot Saturday for the cover of the book, which I'm excited about, but they're trying to go like an old Hollywood like vibe for the cover of this book, which I'm like, I turned 50 this year, so I'm like, let's do it. But the title of the book is The President of the USA Wants Me Dead.
Mic drop. Well, I am very excited about the book, and we will definitely update everyone once it is out there in any of the ongoing updates. So thank you, Julie. Please do ask your questions in the comments. Please do share this video as much as possible. And we will.
If I can't get my hormones, is there anybody out there watching this show that might take pity on an aging woman and at least do just a
little lift,
a neck lift or something?
Yes, please post in the comments if you are legally able to do that procedure and have any experience.
Please do not shoot me up with like concrete caulk from Home Depot.
Yeah, no fillers, please. No internet fillers.
Just a little nip and tuck. Just something behind the ears. Because tape is expensive. I miss doing shows with you. We got to get back into our show.
We do. Yes, we're looking forward to putting out a new show that we will tell you all about soon as well. All right. Bye, Julie.
Oh, the president wants to kill both of us. Mic drop. Bye.